Magic reveals itself to those who remember where to look for it. This is Magic Hour, and I'm your host, Taylor Page. Welcome back to Magic Hour, my loves. Taylor Page here.
And I'm Claire, your producer. Thank you so much for joining us.
We have a big update today. That is, after 7 months, or who knows by the time this is coming out, of having Magic Hour, Claire and I found out how to turn down the volume on our mics.
I Googled it so many times, you guys, and it's a slide. It's not a press.
It's a slide. That is some 2024 technology.
Yeah.
We're back here in our millennial minds trying to press the button, but it's a slide. If you have the Shure MV7 or whatever our microphone is, you'll understand.
Yeah. Probably all the Gen Zers are like, yeah, duh, it's a slide, you guys.
Exactly. They're like, that's so stupid that they didn't know it was a slide. No, it's so funny because as of recording this episode, I'm not sure when it will come out, but we're in eclipse season at the moment. And Magic Hour is actually an eclipse season podcast. And so I feel like Magic Hour is going through this time of like changes and growth. And I'm like, I should have known that an eclipse baby like Magic Hour would have a lot of growth during eclipse season.
Yes. I hope as the podcast grows in this season, so will I.
Beautiful. Yes. We will take our cue from Magic Hour.
Yes.
Right before we started recording, I was talking to Claire about a mediumship reading that I had. And in it, this lady came through and she was showing me Hakuna Matata from The Lion King. And she was showing me them singing Hakuna Matata when their kids were little. And this was not a client. It was in my mediumship circle that she came through. And so I was telling my friend in the mediumship circle, I have your sister-in-law here and she's singing Hakuna Matata and, you know, some other evidence. And the lady was like, oh my gosh, we sang Hakuna Matata together, like at the top of our lungs when, you know, our kids were little and things were overwhelming. And Claire, when I said that, was like, Hakuna Matata is like the most spiritually bypassing song in the world. And I found that so funny. It's so true.
Yes, there's a great meme going around where it's like, hey, I know that your uncle murdered your dad and is trying to steal the throne from you, but did you ever think about just like not worrying about it?
Literally. Hakuna Matata, I guess. And you know what? In some ways, for people who are high strung, I can understand Hakuna Matata being medicinal. But on the other side of that, it is a bit spiritually. But I totally see that. And it kind of reminds me of this moment in high school. This is like such an unrelated tangent, but just bear with me. I was in Fiddler on the Roof and I was playing Seidel. And if you were a theater kid in high school, Claire, were you a theater kid in high school?
I was, yeah.
Okay.
Little Shop of Horrors. I played Audrey.
Oh my, wow, flex. I was actually I was the prop person for Little Shop of Horrors, and I never want to see fake flowers again in my life. They throw me into like a PTSD fit. I like go into the fetal position. So no fake flowers for me. But I played Seidel, and for once in my life, I wasn't double cast. I was double cast as Liesel, and I was like 10 feet taller than her, and like Rolf couldn't pick me up, and it was really traumatic. But anyway, so if you've done high school theater, then you know the kind of cultish relationship people have to the theater teacher, the drama teacher. Like the kids just eat lunch in their room and kiss their ass, and it's so crazy. And so our theater teacher was very much stressed out, and we were all there over the weekend decorating the sets for Fiddler, and we were stringing up tassels for the wedding scene. And I don't remember how, but I was carrying the box of tassels and somehow I like fell or tripped or something. And like the box flew out of my hand. And I swear like a million tassels for the wedding decorations like flew everywhere. And the theater teacher was like so mean to me, honestly. Like she always was. It was a thing, but whatever. And she was like, oh my gosh, like tassels everywhere. She's like, I swear she implied, like, why did I cast you? But maybe my mind is just making that up. But I could have sworn she said something like that. And I was crying and I was a mess and I was so upset. And one of the dads of one of the boys that was one of the actors was volunteering and helping us paint and stuff like that. And he was from Hawaii. And he just started singing, don't worry about a thing. Every little thing is gonna be all right. And it was like the most comforting thing in the world to me. I don't know what it was about his energy. It was a true earth angel moment, and he was the most precious guy. But that just reminded me of Hakuna Matata. It's like, I feel like the point of those songs are when you're at such an overwhelmed moment that all you can do is either cry or sing.
Yes, I love that they did that together when they needed to calm down as kids. And music is so incredible in that way. It's like music is a mood. And so you put on a certain type of music and it literally changes your mood and can make you feel amped up, or it can make you feel relaxed or at peace. And yeah, I just love that. It's such a beautiful tool that we have to like guide our mood in each moment.
I know it is. And if you're a musical theater person, you know that in musical theater, song comes in when the character is in such an emotional point that it's beyond the place of speech. It's not enough to just talk. You have to sing. And that's when the songs come in. And so why can't we use music in the same way? It's like, I don't know how to put words to this. I don't know what I'm feeling. I just want to blast this music.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do that. Like that's really how I can process my emotions sometimes. It's like if I'm sad, sometimes it's nice to just listen to a piece of music that pulls on my heartstrings in that way, and lyrics that describe a feeling or a mood. I mean, my roommate and bestie writes music, and her lyrics and the feeling of the music so beautifully captures the human experience in different ways. I feel like Taylor Swift does that really well. It's like she can capture the feeling of having that crush on someone when you were like a teenager so perfectly. It's like you're back in high school and walking down the hall and you're like, oh my God, there he is. It's just music is magic.
Music is magic. And I know I shared this message before on the pod that music is spirit and musicians are the medium. Like musicians channeling music is nothing different than what I'm doing when I speak to spirit. It's a language of sensory information. And I think musicians are tapping into something that wants to come through to elevate the consciousness on earth and help people feel seen and understood. And I truly think music is a form of spirit. And it's so cool how musicians can bring it into earth.
Yeah, I agree. I know we talked about this briefly, but I think music exists without us. It's like another layer of existence, and we can tap into it. And that's why different types of music make us feel different ways. It's like a universal thing that minor chords create a different mood than major chords. And I think, yeah, it like exists and we tap into it and bring it into this plane of existence. But it's like rhythm and music are here whether or not we tap into it.
Yeah, it's that same idea that Elizabeth Gilbert talks about in Big Magic, that ideas exist without us as well. And so if you're getting the same idea for a really long time and you don't co-create with it or birth it into the world, it will go to someone else. And so you'll realize like, wait a minute, I was going to write a book like that. It's like, yeah, but you didn't. So the idea went to this person who would. And so the idea that ideas exist outside of us is so interesting to me. And then it's like, what's the right human vessel of consciousness to birth this into physical form? And ideas are invitations, but I also find it such an honor to get a good idea, like a strong download moment where you have that full body inspiration and it feels like this thing wants to be created through you and it has it's bigger than just you. I find that to be such an honor to be invited to co-create with things like that. It's like you're lit up by it, you're motivated by it, you're excited about it, and there's just that little extra something something. And I do find that with spirit-led actions, there's a sense of urgency, whether it's saying a message or doing something or creating something. And I find it so beautiful to be in co-creation with the divine through creativity.
Yeah, I so agree. It is just an honor when you get that creative download. And I've written things and felt afterwards like, where did that even come from? I don't even know how I pulled that out, but here it is. And I love it. And it feels really important. And yeah, I love the idea that we are co-creating. We're not just creating by ourselves. And I also don't think like, the universe or our guides are doing it by themselves either. It's like together we come together and birth something into this plane of existence. And yeah, it feels like such
Yeah.
an honor to get to be a conduit for creativity.
The more that I walk this path, the more I realize that it's all about the fusion of spirit and physical presence, like being in a body and spirit. And when you can
Yes.
balance both of those things, you're truly unstoppable on the physical plane. Like you have everything you need. You're not fully in the density of just being the ego story of who you are, but you're also not lost in the clouds of like, I'm not from this planet and can't function here. And you find the right fusion to really walk your highest possible timeline.
That's a beautiful way of describing it. It's like that balance with everything, you know? I feel like that's such a lesson in this life. It's not one or the other. It's this coming together of things, finding the balance of things and being able to kind of walk in that balance.
Yes. And I think a perfect example of walking in that balance is our guest today. I'm so excited to get into the conversation with her. Nikki Novo is a Cuban American best-selling author and master intuitive reader with a waitlist exceeding 1,500 people. She is the creator of the wildly popular podcast Soul Led Living, where she offers her signature intuitive guidance to anyone creating their dream life and business. Nikki is the go-to spiritual advisor for the biggest names in the wellness industry and a leader in the spiritual Latina community. Dedicated to helping people remember their true soul's path, Nikki has been featured in Oprah Daily, Well and Good, Cosmo, Bustle, Marie Claire, NBC, and Telemundo, as well as on popular podcasts like Almost 30, Balance Blonde, What's the Juice, and Highest Self podcast. She has been commissioned to speak by organizations like Equinox, Yahoo, Bumble, Aveeno, Marriott, and Macy's. When she is not leading the way for people to connect with their heart and soul, Nikki is most likely enjoying nature on her 30-acre farm alongside her husband, daughter, two sons, her loyal staffy bull Molly, and their farm animals. Welcome, Nikki Novo. Nikki, welcome to Magic Hour. So happy to have you here today.
Oh, Taylor, thank you so much. I'm just so excited to connect with you. And I've heard such great things. So I'm excited to be here with you.
Oh, thank you. And likewise, I think we have some mutual clients or people that we work with, and I always hear such great things about you too. So it's about time we connected.
Definitely.
uh, so I like to start the pod by asking you, what is your big three?
Oh, gosh. So I tend to get these wrong, but I'm a Cancer. And then I have my rising in Leo. And then I have a moon in Cancer. I sometimes switch the Leo and the Cancer, moon and rising, but I'm pretty sure I got that right.
Wow, double Cancer.
Yeah.
Well, there's the intuition right there. It's interesting because I had Natalie Miles on the pod as well, and she's
Yay.
like a fellow intuitive, and she's a lot of Cancer and Leo as well. And I just find that synchronistic because those are the two luminaries in astrology. They're the eyes. So it makes sense that you guys would see clearly and have that intuitive connection. And interesting, as I continue the pod and ask this question, I like to see the patterns that evolve.
I used to think that Cancer energy was like meant to kill me because it's like it's a lot of hard energy to have growing up. And my mom is also a Cancer and my North Node is also in Cancer. So I thought it was just like trying to drown me my whole life until I discovered my psychic ability. So that was very life changing for me to realize that there was a talent in that shadow.
Yes, there's always a talent in the shadows somehow. And as a Scorpio, I can resonate. There's a couple things I want to say about that. One is that it's so true. Cancer is one of those signs that's one of the hardest to hold because it's ruled by the moon, which switches signs every 2.5 days. So there's never just a ground. And my husband's a double Cancer. And he's a Taurus sun, which is very good and grounding and a nice balance to that. But it's Cancer energy, I think people don't talk about it enough. Like Scorpio, Gemini, like we get the bad raps, but Cancer is really difficult to hold to because it's just so deep. It's so emotional. It's always changing. It's always waxing and waning. And so I totally resonate with that. And the other thing I wanted to say is as an astrologer, I kind of create my own astrological theories. And if this is too personal or intimate, we can totally cut this out. But I have this theory that when we have a parent with the same sun sign as us, we are here for basically cycle breaking and healing in their vein of healing. And that's not to say if you have a kid with the same sun sign, you mess them up or something like that. I think we all have healing to do in this life in one way or another. But when we have a parent with the same sun sign, I feel like there's some sort of similar themes or things that might continue on that you can be a cycle breaker for. And I've seen it in my family, and I've asked a lot of people about this theory, and I'm wondering if that resonates with you.
I have a very similar theory. I'm not an astrologer. I actually didn't study astrology because I was like working on the psychic abilities and I thought it was going to be a conflict, but now I'm like, I wish I would have studied. But I believe that as well. And that is actually very much true for me in my situation with my mom. I love my mom, but it has been a very long, complicated journey. And we continue to work through it. But I also married an Aquarius, and my father is an Aquarius, and my husband's mother is also a Cancer. So
Oh,
we are working
wow.
through so much. We are both working through a lot of childhood trauma because of the way that we married. But I do believe that. Thankfully, none of us have the same sun signs in the family.
That means the cycle's been broken. And that
Exactly.
makes sense because you do this healing work. My great grandma, my grandma, and my mom were all Pisces, and they all had very similar lessons. I think even my great great grandma might have been a Pisces. And I can't say what happened on the pod, but there was some really difficult things that traveled down, and my mom broke the cycle, and I was born a Scorpio. So I just think it's so interesting. And
Oh, that
then
gives me goosebumps.
also, yeah. And I have an aunt that I didn't know about on that side of the family who had the same thing. And I just found her later in life, and she's a Pisces too. So it's so crazy.
That is so, I was going to, it's so funny when you were talking, I was like, are you a Pisces? But then you were like, no, you're a Scorpio. So
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I love pattern recognition and looking out for things. And I shared this theory on my Instagram like maybe 2 years ago or something. And so many people were like, this is me and my mom. This is me and my dad. And I was like, there's really something to this because the sun is like how we see ourselves. And when we're born into a family where we see ourselves in the same vein archetypally as a parent, it's like, of course, our journey in some way will be connected to moving the ball forward with their themes of healing.
definitely. I mean, I've always believed that as well. And my family, we were born in like clusters. So we have a bunch of the similar sun signs. There's a lot going on there, but I didn't really see it as like, I just knew that there was like a reason that we were, attracting that, but I didn't understand like that direct connection. But I totally agree.
That
Makes
is so cool. And it's so funny because a Cancer and an Aquarius could not be more different. And of course, those are just your sun signs, which is so overly simplified. But Aquarius needs like space and air and room to breathe and freedom. And Cancer is like, come down into the depths with me.
Exactly. So my husband and I have like a ton of fun together. We've like made sense of it, but I have a Capricorn South node. He has a Capricorn, I think rising or something. So we meet in our Capricorn signs a
Mm.
lot. We like work together. We collaborate a lot. We like to work hard as well. So we meet at the Capricorn.
I love that. And as a badass business owner, it makes sense that you have a Capricorn South node to me as
Yes.
well. You've mastered the Capricorn energy. So, this is the second question that I like to ask all of our guests. Could probably be a whole series for you. So, just say whatever comes up first. But how does your intuition speak to you?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, I think it's always changing, and I think as a Cancer, people might assume that I'm a big feeler. And so in my courses, I teach like the four different types of intuition, even though there's more than that. But I just simplify it by saying we have feelers, we have knowers, we have seers and hearers. And the majority of people are feelers. Like we've done a bunch of like studies on it. And most people feel like that's kind of how they receive their intuition. And I found that so interesting because I like must have been kind of disconnected, I guess, when I first started from my feelings, because that's not where I would get the first information. I hear a lot. Like I receive just like I hear things almost. And also when a person talks to me, like if you're talking to me and there's something for me, like your voice will like go up in volume or almost be bolded in a sense. So I'm a big hearer. And then I'm also a very big seer, but I enjoy hearing because I think it's a little bit more efficient than actually seeing, because with seeing you have to then translate. But I see like how you're saying patterns. I think because when you are a seer, you automatically imagine that like, oh, I'm seeing all these visuals or the way we dream, which is true. But I used to think like if I was seeing, I was going to see like a ghost next to me. But I have learned that seeing is actually like seeing beyond what is there. And I think something like a pattern, meaning that like you're looking out into the world, there's nothing physical, right? Like there's nothing physical about that connection between the Cancer mom. There's nothing that's like really connecting it, but your ability to see can almost see like this overlay of a shape almost that is connecting everything that makes the pattern. So I see a lot like that as well. And I'm very good at metaphors, and it's because like I can see beyond, let's say, the movie or whatever. And that's because I can see the metaphor. So those are definitely my strongest ones and the ones I like to play with the most.
I love that. I feel like all of our gifts are not accidents, and your gifts with metaphors are so interesting to me because that just speaks to me about you being a natural teacher, because that is the function of metaphors, you know. And my mom, she was a Pisces sun and moon. She always, like, that's how her intuition worked too. And it's so funny because I've never heard anyone else say that. Like, she was the queen at explaining things or conceptualizing big things and narrowing them down through metaphor. And I've never met or heard of anyone else that
Oh,
said
I
so.
have the goosebumps.
Yeah.
She's definitely here. My
Yeah.
so my father, being the Aquarius that he is always like just an eccentric person, especially like in our culture. We're Cuban. Both my parents are Cuban. And he was like not a typical Cuban man by any means. They're a little bit more like machisto and all that. And my father was like, he's a physician, but very artistic, very into cult arts and music and all that stuff. And movies. So as a kid, he would bore me to death with the metaphors of like fables and movies. And I remember being a kid and being like, does this guy like not know that I'm 5 years old? Like, I literally have no interest in this crazy story. But I guess in a strange way, and my father's very intuitive. He uses it a lot in his work as a physician. But I guess in a strange way, he was also training me. And I have never asked my brothers, but I picked up on his teaching very early because he is a metaphor person, I guess, because that's the way he was understanding art and like the channeling of art. So yeah. And then it just stuck. And it is really, people say it all the time. They're like, why do you have a metaphor for everything? I'm like, I have no idea. I'm like, I don't know.
It resonates so much with me since my child grew up with that with my mom. I'm like, yes, Nikki, give me a metaphor. I feel so comforted by your metaphors, please.
We'll have to do a reading together because Taylor, it's like, it's the weirdest thing. I'm like, why do these metaphors come through? But yeah, I guess it's just part of my, my making.
Yeah. And I think metaphors, there's something beautiful about metaphors because it's the fusion of two like things. And that's sort of the spirit world and the physical world. And for some reason, there's something about that that just makes sense to me, that clicks into place, that metaphors have a higher function of comparing like things and drawing that comparison in ways that you wouldn't expect. So it makes sense that it would be an intuitive gift to me.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, I agree because you're able to see that kind of what you're currently going through or something that you're currently understand. God has already created like another example of that. And if your situation feels very complicated, there's actually like a simple way of explaining it actually through nature, through something that already exists. So yeah, I think that's beautiful.
Absolutely. And a message that I get over and over again is that truth is simple, fear is complicated. And
Yep.
so when you get a message that's just a pure, loving, truthful message, a simple metaphor is a perfect way to explain it. Whereas fear is like, well, if you don't do this, then this could happen, then that could happen, and this happened before, and that this. But truth is like, no, you are XYZ with this metaphor, and it's just simple. It's nervous system regulating, it's solution oriented, it's empowering. So I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, I always, obviously, I'm sure you get that question all the time, like the difference between intuition and anxiety or fear or whatever. And I always say, fear feels like your friend when she has like way too much coffee, like in her system, it's like very complicated. It's like a lot of words. It's like a very fast vibration where your intuition really should be simple. And I think that's what frustrates people with intuition because people, I remember one of like the first awakenings I had, which was like this sense of hearing. I was set up to get married very young. I was engaged very young, and I was like 2 months away
Wow.
from my wedding. I think I must have been like 21, 22, I forget. And I'm in New York City. I'm in the middle of like Rockefeller Center, just looking at all the people ice skate. And I'm just staring there. And all of a sudden I hear this voice, which was like, again, I was not connected to my intuition in the way that I am now, but I heard this voice saying, "You are meant for something bigger." And I was like, that is inconvenient and doesn't mean anything. I had already had my doubts about getting engaged and, getting married so young, but this voice came through. And I think, I understood it. It came with a lot of power. So it really was a thing that told me, like, you're going to call off this wedding and you're going to move on to something else. But I think there was a time after I got that intuitive hit that I started to doubt that message because it was so simple in a sense. I was like, give me the itinerary. Hopefully a Virgo made the itinerary too. Like I want like every step, I want to know exactly where I'm going, how I'm going. And I think we tend to have a misunderstanding of what intuition does. And if it is not complicated like that it doesn't give us like the whole yellow brick road, we think that it's wrong when it's really the next step. And it is usually a very simple message.
Absolutely. And your friend on too much coffee is the perfect metaphor. So, yeah, I love that so much. And it's so true. And that story is a perfect example. It's present, it's solution oriented, it's empowering. And usually, and especially for you as a listener, as you said, as clairaudience, it's usually in the second person, like you've got this, you are meant for so much more. And so I love that example. And I want to circle back to clairaudience being one of your first clairs because that's very different than me in my experience. So I'm really excited to pick your brain more because actually, I don't know if I'm a bad listener, but clairaudience is my last clair to come online. And even when I'm in a reading and a spirit is telling me their name, I more know their name than actually hear their name. So was that that moment that you heard you are meant for so much more? Was that the first time you ever got something that way?
That I remember. I mean, I'm sure
Yeah.
it's happened. I have like definitely other like childhood stories that definitely showed signs, but I grew up in a very Catholic family, Hispanic. So, I mean, I always joke that like if I showed any signs, my mom would have like sent me to some sort of nun school or something. So I didn't show too many signs as a kid. And that was, these were like these moments where I was like, getting ready to kind of break off. I was in college. I was no longer in Catholic school. So I started to open up the senses as soon as I was kind of like breaking free. And that was like my first experience. And I felt comfortable with that because as I started to like opening up my senses, I was scared of seeing. I was scared of knowing. I was just scared. So I relied a lot on my hearing. I think signs of being a hearer too is that you're very sensitive to sound. I'm like extremely sensitive to sound. And the way that I hear, which is like a little bit different than knowing, is I would say that like I have to stop, I get present, and then I almost feel like a thread coming through my ear, if that makes any sense. Because it's not always a voice. A lot of it is like it's a vibration that is a sound, almost like if I'm a dog or something. Like I don't really hear the sound, but I can pick up the information from the vibration, like through my ears, if that makes sense. So yeah, I'm very like attuned to reading energy. Like, so I can sense energy. I just have to like hold my focus and then I can pick up the information that's in that energy. And a lot of times, like I hear it, if that makes any
Mhm.
sense. Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. And I just think it's the most interesting in the world how we all come in with such different gifts and abilities. I have a very similar thing of feeling threads of energy, but through my physical hands. And that's why I work with cards because I can actually, it's not even about what's on the card, it's the messages I get as I'm pulling the cards. I don't even flip the cards over until the end of my reading. It's about what I'm feeling when I get quiet and pull them. So I totally understand that. It's interesting what you said too about how when people are even speaking to you, their volume gets a little louder or more clear when you know it's something you need to hear. And for me, I know I have the gift of inspired speaking. And when I'm giving messages that are needing to come through, I get louder, like physically,
Yeah.
like my voice gets louder and more powerful. So I think that's really cool hearing the inverse side of that.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I always wonder too, because I do feel that like now when I do readings, kind of all the senses come online together and I'm just fully
Yeah.
present. And it's hard to tell the difference, like what is happening first. But I do like, I'm raising, two young boys and they're just kids are born naturally intuitive. We all are, but some of us like turn it off at some point. And I always like wonder if some of our intuitive gifts are influenced by like what was most safe growing up. And so, for example, like feeling, like I don't think I'm a strong feeler because there were too many emotions in my house, but like unspoken emotions. And I kind of learned to protect myself from those. And then I depended. It's almost like you're blind and then you become a really good listener or something like that. So I do feel like some of the students that I work with, that some of the gifts have to do too with the kind of homes that we grow up in. And yeah, like what was beneficial, like kind of what gift was beneficial to have. I also like, I've met a lot of feelers that grew up in homes where, parents were holding back from information, like to keep the kids safe or whatever, but they learned to feel emotions so that they could get by. And so I've always been curious about that. I think we might have all of the gifts, but I wonder if I think we start to lean on some the same way. Like if you're used to working out your legs, doesn't mean you don't have like arm strength. It's just that you're just like working out your legs a lot. So they look stronger. And I think our environment might influence that a little bit.
That is fascinating. Clairsentience and claircognizance, feeling and knowing were my like bread and butter clairs for the longest time. And then seeing came online and then hearing is like, like trying. No, it comes through sometimes. So in my home growing up, I was raised by a double Pisces mom, and it was so safe for me to feel. I could feel all my feelings, and trust me, as a Scorpio, I had big feelings and I was so dramatic and I would be so intense with my emotions. And so I think that theory is so fascinating and has a lot to it that I could understand. And I think also our gifts go hand in hand with our clairs. Like people who are extremely visual might be more clairvoyant and more of a seer. People who might learn more auditorily or like music or things like that might be good listeners. So I think there's also so many factors that build on what clairs naturally feel easy for us and which ones take more time to develop.
I always say like when you try, it's actually like quite simple. Like when you are talking to a friend and you're trying to empathize with them, you'll typically say like, oh no, yeah, I feel you. I feel you. Or I hear you. I hear you. Or you'll say like, no, I see it. I see it. I see it for you. That is pointing to where your gifts are.
Absolutely. That's so, so true. And it is so simple. We don't have to overthink these things. And once the clairs all come together, they feed each other. When I was at Arthur Findlay College last year, one of my teachers was like, the clairsentience is kind of the main clair, and everything else feeds that clair. So, like, you feel your way through, and then you see something, but you also have a feeling about it, and you hear something, and then you feel something, and then it just weaves together in this beautiful way.
Totally.
Yeah, I love that. So I want to rewind a little bit because you said that you grew up in an extremely Catholic home and that this work was not encouraged. And I'm just wondering, what was your journey of embracing these gifts, healing the witch wound, finding your way to this work? Because I'm sure it was not your original plan for yourself.
No, I mean, it definitely was like probably the biggest surprise of my life. I mean, I grew up Catholic. I went to Catholic school my whole life. So I was born in New Jersey. My parents, after they left Cuba, went to New Jersey. We were born there. And I went to public school. So I wasn't exposed too much to religion or CCD as much. And then we moved to Miami and we were put into Catholic school. And so I was in third grade. And I remember being in third grade class, and this religion teacher is teaching us about how nuns and priests get called into service, because she was trying to let us know that some of us were going to be called to be like priests or nuns. And, she's like, you go to sleep, and then this really big angel comes into your room and like tells you that God is calling you to like work for them. I remember I was young. I mean, God's third grade, I guess you're like 8 or something like that. And I'm looking around at the class. I'm like, what the fuck? Did anybody just hear this? This lady is telling me that like some giant angel is going to like show up to my bed. Like I was scared because I really felt there was something about that like I knew that God was going to use me, if that made sense. And I was like not okay with how this call came to be. And my mom says that I couldn't sleep for like a whole week, that I wouldn't sleep because I was convinced that this angel was going to show up. And also, like, I didn't want to be a nun because I wanted to get married and I wanted to have kids. And, the cancer in me was like, this doesn't make any sense. I want to make money. All these things. So I didn't have like a horrible experience with the religion because it gave me the spirituality that I was thirsting for anyways. Like I loved having the religion. We had religion class every day, all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't too bad, but I would say that, yeah, it would be interesting to see what it would look like if I didn't have that, like if I would have woken up earlier or whatever. So, I graduate from high school and when I go to college is when I'm free. And that was like the beginning of my experience. I was like studying world religions. I was like consuming anything anybody could give me. And that was like the beginning of the awakening for me. I went through a bad breakup and that bad breakup drew me to a psychic. And I was like, that's it. I'm going to a psychic, even though my mom told me never to go to a psychic or the religion told me never to go to a psychic. But I had this one girlfriend who grew up with me and she was also Catholic. She's like the person that you call when you need something illegal, or something illegal done. I was like, you definitely know a psychic, don't you? And she's like, yeah, of course I do. So we went to a psychic and I was like, whoa. And I was super into it. And at that point, I was a fashion and beauty editor. I was living on my own and I allowed myself to study, but it was very hard. And I think that I have a very strong witch wound. I have a ton of memories of like past lives as a witch and all those things. And for a long time, my business was done in a cave. I always say you wouldn't really know too much about me. I wasn't doing a lot of social media. Like you kind of would hear about me. And even the social media I would do wouldn't even go very far. So that's an interesting thing. Like if you're trying to spread a message and it's not going very far, it's interesting to like look at that for a second. And I was like, oh, I don't want a lot of people to know who I am and what I'm doing. So that was difficult, but I got by because I was very word of mouth when I first started and like my classes, but everything I taught was always in a little cave. Like it's like you could only come to learn from me if you went to a Zoom call with me or if you had a session with me. I forever could not do it in public. And even if I would go a little bit more public, I would do it on podcasts, which I think, again, like you have to kind of know the podcast to find it. It's not a very searchable thing. So those things were very hard. I truly felt like I was going to be persecuted. I also married my husband as a fashion and beauty editor. And then a few years in, I was like, hey, by the way, like, I think, this is what I want to do. Was also raised Catholic. His parents are Catholic. He's also Cuban. So I am very grateful to him because I think back to like all the guys that I dated, and I don't think like any guy that I dated would have been okay with this switch because it was really like a switch in identity and like who I am, and he was so gracious. The Aquarius in him, he was like, all right, cool. Yeah, that sounds weird, but like you do you, boo. And so he was very supportive, but I would say for the first few years as I was coming out, I did not talk to anybody about it other than the people that were coming to me for it. So those people that were coming to me, I had a few friends that I could talk to, but I like was normal person by day and then kind of like witch by night. And that was a very hard transition, but ultimately, and because I started my work in 2008. So even the world wasn't like the millennials were still young. I'm an elder millennial. I'm like the second to last year of a millennial. And it's really the millennials that came and they accepted all this stuff. But before that, it was like so strange. So it was a very hard transition. And I feel like the deconditioning from the Catholic religion has been one of the hardest things. And I still work through it. And every time I release it a little bit, I feel like I gain more power in my gifts and in who I am. But it's a process, there's a lot of guilt, all that kind of stuff.
There's so many parallels between our stories. I was raised Jewish, but I went to Catholic school as well. And I loved the word. Yeah. And there were moments when I was a child in temple and I was like, don't speak to God for me. I can speak to God myself. And so I also didn't resonate with group worship, I guess. I liked the individual speaking to God. And there's nothing wrong with group worship. I just didn't resonate with it as a kid myself.
Same.
And then I went to Catholic school, and I was like, at that time, my mom was very witchy. She was an astrologer. So I was raised with that, and she wasn't Jewish. My dad was. So I kind of had like a mixed upbringing. But yeah, I thought Catholicism was pretty witchy when I went
Oh,
to
it's
Catholic
so much.
school.
No, and like
Yeah.
Hispanics, like my mom, she still gives me a hard time about what I do. And I have a ton of funny stories about like how my mom took this transition. And I'm like, it's like this lady shows up every other day with like a different statue and like
Yep.
a different like thing that I need to pray and a this and this. I'm
Altars
like,
and yeah.
what? I'm like, wait, tell me how like my spirit guide or my guardian angel is different than your Saint Jude. Like, I don't get.
Exactly. They're like, this is the saint we pray to for lost things. This is the saint that we do this. I'm like, yes, you guys, that's very witchy, but please just continue. And all of my friends in Catholic school that were Catholic were also the most, I don't know if this is a millennial thing or whatever, but just so open. Like they were living their life like normal. They weren't living by these strict rules of being
Yes.
Catholic, but then they were Catholic.
I agree. So in my Catholic upbringing, it was similar to like how like I think sometimes like Jewish families are like it was more cultural because we're
Yeah.
Hispanic and you're Catholic. It's like almost a cultural thing rather than a set of morals. I mean, we had gay children, like there's gay people in our community. There's people living together before they get married, like sex.
Yeah.
I mean, all those kind of things. Like our parents were not on top of us for those things by any means. So it was definitely more cultural. I would say the biggest shock for me, because Miami is similar to LA, it's so diverse and it's like not even the US. Sometimes you go there and you're like, well, I'm in another country. That's really what it feels like. So I grew up in that. So when I moved, I lived in LA for a little bit and that felt very comfortable, felt very similar. But I recently moved 3 years ago from Miami to Western North Carolina, which I don't know if it's like officially considered the Bible Belt, but man, there is a church on like every corner and it's very Christian, which is different. I didn't see in Miami, it's very Catholic because we're mainly Hispanic. But there's all these like breakoffs of the Catholic Church, like Baptist and Lutheran and all these things. And I hadn't have too much experience with that. And I was like, whoa, they come at it hard. Like this is where I have felt the most like persecuted. And obviously that's on me. Like I'm attracting that. So I'm working on that. Like I'm working on not engaging and not needing to like prove myself. That is the work that I'm working on. So I think part of why I was brought here was to like just clean out that final piece of the witch wound, because although I had a witch wound in Miami, like you said, my friends never judged me for that. They weren't interested in what I'm doing. They're not like asking me for readings, but there's still a ton of love for me, right? It's like, that's your lifestyle. So I was always safe there. Now over here, there's a different, and I've had some stories and it's interesting. And for me, I think that I'm attracting it. So I'm working through that currently. And I think I'm just like closing out a witch wound that I've had for a long time.
That is so interesting. And I always say that those people that we attract when we are in any vibe of our witch wound, we attract those experiences to heal it. And when we heal our witch wound, we attract our soul family. And that's so interesting to me with your upbringing and the breaking down what was embedded in your heart about these things and then going to this. It all feels very karmic. And
it's so karmic. And it's just funny that
yeah.
I was given the Catholic religion this lifetime. Like I think that was on purpose, because Catholicism has a ton of guilt in it because it was created by Paul, and Paul was a murderer of Christians for a long time. And then he created the church. So there's a ton of Paul's guilt, like within the Catholic Church. So it's like an energy of guilt. And I mean, there's the saying like the Catholic guilt, like that's like a saying, right? So that is something that I think is interesting for anybody that is like trying to kind of step into their gifts and allow themselves to, be more of who they are. If there's a lot of guilt from your upbringing, it is hard to be authentic and like to be who you truly are. So I would say that the biggest conditioning has been like the guilt of who I really am and like embracing how God created me. And it's crazy because I know God created me this way. Like the amount of gift I have in intuition is not a coincidence. It is my gift. and God created me. So how could I doubt that gift? I was born this way. I was made this way. But in a weird way, sometimes when you're raised in some of those religions, you're just told that you're supposed to be a certain way. And there's a lot of guilt around that. So I would say that is the thing that I had to work through and, I'm sure continue to work through because there's layers. And, every time you release that, yeah, I love that idea. I love what you say about like, you're attracting the healing, but then you break free of it and then you bring in your soul family, which is so beautiful.
Yeah. And I love that your husband was accepting of that too. That's so perfect to be married to an Aquarius because they really roll with things that are outside the margins of society or whatever. So I think that's beautiful. And it can be really interesting because I met my husband as I was already doing this work. I think it's really cool that you started in 2008 because I remember 2016, 2017 was a really big year for up leveling, awakening, people coming to this. That's the time period I started Angels and Amethyst. But 2008, and even when I started Angels and Amethyst, people are like, what is an angel reading? Like it still hadn't taken off yet. And that's where I started was with angels. And in 2008, I can't imagine what it would be like for people. Like it was so not on the radar of anything. So I think that is so cool that you started all the way back then.
Yeah. And I just had like OG teachers. I was like in Miami, you have, because Cubans, they're Catholic, but we enslaved a lot of African people that came with their African religion. So there's a lot of African derived religion, which is also what makes like Hispanics so witchy because we're so mixed. And African derived religions really are just like they're worshiping, they put them under Catholicism in order to be able to like continue like loving their own, thing and like not be murdered for, doing their practices. So because there was like that witchiness in the Caribbean culture that I grew up in, there were a ton of women in Miami that practiced, I always say like in their backyard on their plastic patio table. And I would meet them once I started getting to psychics. I'm like, these people are amazing. Like people that would read coffee beans and women just from like this culture. So, and this is like the coolest, like just the coolest work ever. So I was just lucky that always existed in my culture and it was easy to find them growing up. And I like learned a ton. And then I was part of that movement that you were also part of, where we professionalized a very ancient old practice that women have been doing forever and men too, because I definitely met some men that practice as well. And we professionalized it because these people were in hiding. They were getting paid $50 to like do some incredible work. And I just remember when started to become like more obvious that I was like being called to do readings, I was like, okay, but I'm going to professionalize it. I'm going to study a bunch. I'm going to like know about all sorts of different religions. And, I'm going to go for it. And then I trained people to also feel professional. And I think that all of us together that were waking up and kind of like pioneers at that time, not that we were, doing anything new because it's been around forever. Like I was mentored by a ton of women. They were not of the era that we were of the era that we were like, we're going to spread this message. We're going to professionalize it. Like this is something I think spiritual work and, intuitive work is something that is now part of somebody's wellness toolbox. It's like you're going to your doctor, but you're also going to your intuitive and you're going to your energy cleaner and all these things because we understand that in order to heal, it is a mind, body, soul. And I think together we all did that together. And I'm something I'm very proud of.
What was the time period where you became more public with your work?
Yeah, it's funny when you said that. You said, what did you say, 2016?
Yeah, 2016, 2017 is when I
Yeah,
started.
I would say that's probably around the time because I
Yeah.
married in 2012, had my son at 2013. So it must have been between 2014 and 2016, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a time period where a lot of people, like you said, this work has, of course, been around forever. It's ancient and there were always people practicing it, but we took it into the light a little bit more. We
The
took it
light.
into the public a little bit more and we broke another boundary, and the boundaries keep getting broken and broken and broken by each generation pushes the ball forward a little bit. And that's just part of the pendulum swinging back to the way of the divine feminine that has been so lost.
Yes, absolutely. And it gives me goosebumps. I mean, it's something like I think we should all be very proud of, because it's amazing what we've done in just a few years. Like how and I'm sure you see it, like you get executives. I have like wealth management clients. I have
Yeah.
CEOs, it's like, it is doctors, attorneys, like it is out there, and it is
Yeah.
respected, and it's important work.
Very successful people, clients from royal families that I can't talk about. There's like people in all walks of life that are getting readings and connecting, and soon it will be even more public. It will be like, yeah, I just went to the doctor's office and this is like what I was dealing with. And yeah, I just got a reading and this is the soul thing I'm dealing with. It's like maybe one day we'll get to that point.
Totally.
So I want to ask you, what was your experience when you first became a mother? Did that change your connection to intuition, and did it open you up more? I'm not a mother myself, but I'm thinking about, my husband and I are thinking about it in the next year or two. And I'm like, how does that change your connection? Because you're literally bringing a soul through and you're opening this portal, and that can't leave you unchanged.
Oh my gosh, yes, and that's so exciting. It's such an exciting time. I have goosebumps. Your spirit babies obviously with you. So I always say that people's spiritual awakenings are usually either from like spirit, like there's like a spiritual experience, or sometimes it's like a body experience that kind of brings us down this place. And mine was definitely like a spiritual, like I kind of, my senses were opening up, all that. I didn't really go through the body. But then when I had my first child was when I saw the purpose of the body. I was like hanging out in the upper chakras for a while, and I didn't understand like how the body could have wisdom and how it could be intuitive and how it could support the work. So for me, the first pregnancy and delivering the baby, like it just, giving birth to a soulmate, I think for me, I started to see that there was purpose to the body when it came to like your spirituality. So that was helpful. Also, each child has a different energy. So when you're carrying them, it's very interesting to have, your Cancer energy, like all the energy that I carry. And then all of a sudden, like my first was a Gemini, excuse me. And it was a hilarious, like just kind of like a very funny energy that I was carrying with me. And that was an interesting psychic experience, because I didn't know that. I don't know. I didn't know the body could do that, I guess, if that made sense. So that was super cool. And then my second is a Capricorn, and it was like very strong, and it like helped me birth like a new body of work when he was born as well. So I found, because I see everything kind of like through a soul lens, the births were really more about, it made me understand more of who I was on a soul level. And I was like very clear who my children were on a soul level. And it basically like, it actually formed the family, which is interesting. It's like you go from an individual, even though you're married and you have your partner, as I was, but then like the kids come in and you start to see like that soul family land. And I think for a while, you're only aware of like maybe your soul's path, if you're lucky, or your own soul's purpose. Like maybe you know it a little bit. I knew mine at the time. But then this family started to like fall into place. And I was like, oh, I see what our soul purpose is as a family and how we work together. And it was like very, like just so crazy to see. I had already like had a lot of like psychic gifts. So I didn't have a huge turn up on the gifts, but I have had so many clients that like all of a sudden, that mother, and maybe because I'm a Cancer, I like carry that energy so much, but I did see so many friends and clients like just, gosh, like take such advantage of that motherly intuition that comes with it. And they kind of coupled it with like their own intuition training. And that is super cool to see, because you can get a lot out of that experience. So I had a lot of remembering after the kids, if that makes sense, a remembering of like, uh, of me as a soul and them as a soul and other lifetimes. So that was different than kind of just the psychic abilities that I had before.
Ooh, that is so cool. And just the idea of carrying a different archetypal consciousness within you and that opening up your brand of that archetypal consciousness that might have been dormant or less conscious within you is such an interesting idea. I've never heard anybody speak to that. And I think that's so cool. It's like the children that we bring through us are the facets of ourself and our energy that need to maybe be looked at or awakened so that we can properly take care of them.
Definitely. Yeah. To birth a Capricorn and to have a South Node in Capricorn, I just, man, I just got so much done in such a small amount of time when I was pregnant with him. And I just,
Wow.
I bossed up. Like it was my second child, but it was like, he was telling me like, we got to tighten up this family. Like this is a little bit of a shit show. Like you can't be individuals. Like you got to come in. And he was like very emperor vibes and just like getting everything together. And if you're aware of it, you could use it. I think if you're not aware of it, where the Gemini energy was a little bit more like an anxious energy for me, I was like, oh, but I also communicated so much. I wrote a book like while I was pregnant with
I
him.
was going to say, with your Gemini, you had to have written a book. So
I
there you
did.
go.
It was an awful book. It was like my first shot at a book. It was a bad book, but nonetheless, like I was like,
Yeah.
I gotta get this out. I gotta get this out. And I
Yeah.
didn't understand at first. I think also because I feel like wherever he was landing, it was like not going to be a guarantee that he was a Gemini. So I think that was like the confusion where my Capricorn like was absolutely going to be a Capricorn. Like it would be very slim chance that he wasn't. So I was less aware of what I was carrying. But yeah, that would be
Yeah.
like my little tip that if you kind of know what they're going to be,
Yeah.
you can have fun and use the energy for
That
something.
is so cool. It's like you're already co-creating with them
Yes.
and they're already living through you in that way. I think that's so beautiful. And I wanted to ask you, because I feel intuitively that people might wonder about this, is how did you know you were done having kids? Like when did you know your family was complete and how did that come across for you?
Yeah. Well, first, my last child, my husband has a daughter from another relationship. So it was hard to convince him for the third one, like he was like, oh,
Yeah.
giving me a hard time. So I was just excited to have that. But I knew there was just something about that child, about Ethan, my last, who like he was like a bookend. Like his
Mm.
energy felt like a bookend. And I'm not gonna lie, like my husband and I have talked about it before. Like there was times we wanted to have more, but we also knew that like the combination of the energy that we had, that was like the bookend. That was like the closing of it. When I read people's energy and I can see like the spirit babies, I typically see that there's like a definite, usually there's a definite one or two or whatever. Like you kind of, your first few are like super destined. And then it looks like what I've always seen is almost like there's like variations to the path that you could allow more in if you wanted to, but it would add some variations to the path that you're already on. So I personally was like, I see where we're going. I see our path and I don't want to dilute it. And it was kind of a
Yeah.
sacrifice for especially a Cancer mom that would like, want to have many children. But I kind of had to take like a leadership role at that point and understand that this was going to be very potent if I stayed at this size.
Yeah, that's a very well articulated way to explain it because from an energetic standpoint, I totally understand what you're saying. It's like you could bring in another soul, but then you wouldn't have the same focus, energy, attention, and full cup to devote to this timeline. It would be
Yes.
slightly diluted. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think from a human standpoint, right, you're adding more to your plate and there's
Yeah.
another child to take care of. But I have always seen children as like, as souls and that they have their own path. And like, I am like the shepherd to that path, like I'm not here to tell them what their path is or whatever, but I can sense what their path and purpose is. And it's always revealing itself to me. And to me, that is my job. So if I had to handle like two more paths and purposes within my family, I might not be able to like I almost like knew my limitations there.
Yeah, that's very responsible. That sounds very responsible. And if I do get pregnant, I could use some Capricorn energy.
Okay, we'll put it out there.
My north node is in Capricorn, and my south node is at Cancer at the 29th degree. So,
Okay.
yeah.
We're the opposite, finally.
Yeah. So I want to ask a lot of people, I mean, really from 2020 through 2024, have been going through times of such up level, transition, growth. It's been such a powerful moment. And when we're in these time periods of unknown, up level tests, lessons, transformation, karma, it can be so hard to connect with our intuition, to trust that voice when our nervous system is dysregulated and we're in this place of fight or flight and survival mode. And I'm wondering if you've been seeing a lot of this in your sessions, if there's maybe a common theme or message that you've been getting about this, or if you just have any advice for our listeners of how to navigate times of up level, unknown, and discomfort.
Yeah, so I love this question. And I really feel that this is, I actually had a feeling you were going to ask something like this. I have a feeling that this is actually coming from Mother Earth. So to me, this is like Mother Earth evolving and like pushing her children to the next level because she is changing. And therefore, she's like asking her children to change as well. And I don't know if this is every up level for civilization. I just know that this up level is coming from her. And because of that, I think it's very unsettling because it's almost like hitting the root chakra. It's like it's a lot of root chakra
Mm-hmm.
stuff. It's a lot of how I make my money, where I live. It's almost like mom is like pushing you out of the house, you know, in many ways. And it's like very unsettling. But I actually find that like the solution is actually going back to her. Like, so people, we say it all the time, but like actually going into nature, even like communing with nature. So, like, you know, maybe you live in a busy city, you live in New York City, but the ways that you can commune is like bringing herbs into your diet, or you know, even bringing in a house plant, or bringing more greens. Like somebody who like lives in nature might not need as many greens and herbs because they're in it a little bit differently. But I would say that is actually where you're going to remember who you are, because Mother Earth is like asking us. She feels like almost like her children have forgotten where they come from and who they are. So she is asking not only like the history of you, so there will be a lot of lineage work, kind of how we started the conversation, where, you know, where did you come from, what is like antiquated in your lineages. And you know, let's say like this is how I deal with money, and it's like that might be coming from your lineage, but that may be a very antiquated way of dealing with money, let's say, or dating or whatever that may be. So there's going to be like, who am I? Like, where do I come from? Like my physical lineage. But then also there's another layer of that of, you know, who am I as like a child of Mother Earth? And what I mean by that is like, you know, we were born of like, we are a species. We are like just like a plant and a tree and all that, like born of her. And she is like almost feeling like we've been too disconnected from, almost like too egotistical to remember that we are nature. And yeah, and so I feel like a lot of it is going to come from the returning to some of that nature. And like, listen, I'm by no means like crunchy or whatever. I mean, I grew up in a city and all that kind of stuff, but I understand like that this is the time for her. And especially those of us who are spiritual, we hang out in the upper chakras. We love like the crown, the third eye, you know, the throat. And I get it, like me too, but there's actually like a next level of spirituality that is actually going to come from your small times in nature, or even those of us that might be exploring plant medicine. Like if you're being called to some sort of like plant medicine, some ritual, it could be as simple as cacao to as, you know, complicated as ayahuasca, let's say. But any of that is like supporting, because she feels like her children should have evolved by now. And that's why we see like herbs and psychedelics and these kind of things coming, because the brain is a little too antiquated for where she expects us to be. So it is like a mother that has like some expectations for us, and that like we're missing it a little bit. And it's going to come from like our nature. So that would be like lineage, but then also like, who are we as a species, and how can we advance as a species? And to think that your body is like a vehicle that is trying to upgrade. So we'll see a lot of it in the brain as well.
That is so fascinating. I love that message so much. And it just gave me chills as you were speaking. And I think it's so true with technology and our virtual lives and everything. We are so in our upper chakras. We're always overthinking. We're always comparing. We're always projecting. We're running down the hill into the future. And something about the root chakra, and this part really resonated with me too when you were talking about the pregnancy journey, bringing you back to the lower chakras. And pregnancy is a return to like our primal nature and our body knowing what to do. So it is so interconnected. And to me, all of the times I've got messages when I was in nature were times that I was very patient. And I feel like the root chakra has like maybe a slower frequency than the upper chakras. And sometimes you just have to sit for hours in the medicine of nature, and it's not you thinking, okay, I'm ready for the message, what's the message, I'm ready for it. It's just being in that resetting energy and sitting in it and soaking it up and slowing down within nature that's going to make the shift.
Yeah, because the upper chakras are about receiving downloads, all that stuff. The lower and the connection to earth is about embodying those lessons. So we've had the awakenings, we had COVID, Corona, like crown. We've had that already. And now it's like we need to embody it. So, like, actually put it in the body and be it. So, like, act as if, right? Rather than like having all this knowledge and wanting more knowledge. We are just coming off of the blogging, the social media, all these things that brought us so much knowledge. And now, why is knowledge becoming destructive at this point? Fake news and what's true and AI, like we don't know what's true anymore. And it's because that time is over, like, okay, we studied a bunch, we learned a lot, we opened up through information, through the upper centers. And now what are we going to do with that information? How are we going to act with that information? Who are we going to be with that information? So that's why, like, going into nature, it's like you said, it's not so much like super heavy on knowing, but rather than like letting it create the shift in you so that you can become whatever you're being asked to become, which I have personally experienced because I've been living on 30 acres of land for the last 3 years, where I used to live on a grid in city like everybody else. And it is crazy, like the shift that, like, you don't even have to, spend a bunch of time with the trees. You're just like living in it. And it has changed me tremendously.
Can you speak a little bit more to that? Like, what was the adjustment like when you got there, and how has it increased your capacity to just root and ground and listen to yourself and maybe be a little bit more open as a container?
Yeah, it was a scary decision because I'm a city girl, and actually funny, from my lineage, my mother is from like a small town in Cuba. And my grandfather owned like a large dairy farm and all that. So they're like country people, but my grandparents spent like a ton of money like shipping my mom and her sister into the city to be educated, and they were always trying to like create city kids, and then they moved to New York City, and they were very proud of like getting out of the country and like kind of becoming city people. So, I always knew, very, like, would never tell my parents, but I always knew that my grandfather and his lineage were like calling me back to land one day, that somehow I would find myself like back in land. And because Cubans are exiles, so they were kicked out of the country and they lost everything that they had, right? So it was kind of a little bit of like kind of reclaiming that back. So I knew that was going to be part of just something I did for the lineage this lifetime. So I knew that, but I had no idea how that would ever happen. So I don't know if anybody feels like they are meant to move, but they're like, my husband's job is here, or like my kids go to the school, or like the grandparents are here. I felt that way too. I wouldn't even voice it to my husband because I just was like, I don't know, maybe I move and I'm not with the guy. Like, I have no idea how this happens, but I know it's going to happen eventually. So I'm not going to even voice it. But your life and your path and your soul has a plan. So little by little, it became a little bit more possible. And a lot of it was because of my work and because of 2020. It was just like things were becoming more possible. So we moved in 2021 from Miami to Western North Carolina, bought 30 acres of land. And I mean, God, like, it is so crazy. Like, you just don't know what you don't know. It's like my nervous system I had no idea how high alert it was on all day. And I was living true to who I was. I wasn't working a crazy job, or I was like raising my family the way I wanted to. I was around good people. But there's something about cities because they're very linear and they're on like a grid. Like, neighborhoods are on these grids. And then I show up to the country and I'm like, what the shit is this? Like, you meet people in the country and they're like, I own that little piece over there to the left and this one to the right. And like, my house is off to and you're like, whose property is this? And because there's no grid, it's like, it's very weird how people like split up their properties here.
I love that.
Yeah. And you're in the mountains, so it's not flat. So that was an adjustment too. So one thing that happened to me was like, and that is part of like my soul's path, right? Like, I'm a south node, excuse me, I'm a north node Cancer, a south node Capricorn. So I was a very linear person. And then coming into here, I had to become, everything is very wild here. We're in Miami, everything's very manicured and very perfect. So I kind of had to like rewild here and also like learn to not be as linear. And that was like what the medicine of the earth was trying to do for me. And it, just opened up more. was like allowed to become more of that feminine, more of the Cancer. And I wasn't really able to live that so much because I was still in that heavy like Capricorn energy. I think watching my husband has been like tremendously healed, and he left his job and when we moved here, and I'm the one that's been working and kind of holding down the fort, but he's been maintaining and taking care of the land and building like new structures and things on it. And I mean, it is like night and day. This person is like a different person, especially men who are like just taught to be like heavy core providers and like all this stress. And it's like, I have a new husband. He says it's because of like how much he has to work with the land. So you do attune to the vibration, but it will, if you are trying to find land and it hasn't happened for you yet, we came to this area 5 years before we bought. And that was like, we thought we were ready at the time and we definitely were not. And after those 5 years, it was probably like 5 of like the craziest years of my life. And it was really that the land was trying to prepare me to actually be here, because it's like I wasn't attuned to that vibration to be able to be the steward of this land. So I would say that if you're thinking of land, like go ahead and visit it first and kind of get a feel for it. And then ask the land to shift within you whatever needs to be shifted in order for you to actually get to where you want to go to. And that was like an intention that we set. It took us 5 years for us to like get our shit together. And it was a ton of different things. It was like, there was codependencies in the relationships. There was addiction in my family. There was just a lot of root chakra stuff, like just like, okay, money and like businesses have to be good and steady and all that. And after this horrible 5-year roller coaster, which I forgot about the land, I didn't even think we were ever going to move here. Then it's like the opportunity started to present itself. But funny enough, we bought this land. It had no house on it. We moved here and we were living in a small house that we bought that was like at the bottom of the land. But we knew we were going to build at the top. And even that was like such an initiation. Like the land was like, you have all this work to do before you can actually build your house inside the forest. Like you are not attuned to us enough. Like your vibration is not a match for like our vibration. And I had to cleanse a lot and go through my own like healing and my family's healing in this like kind of 1 year period. And it was funny, like different like delays were happening for the house and all that. And it had everything to do with us not being ready to live higher up on the mountain. Because, the higher up you go too, you feel it when you hike, the higher you go, like the closer to God or whatever, but it's a different vibration because the land it's like further away from our densities. So it has changed my work tremendously. I knew when I was living in Miami that I was hitting a ceiling and that this was as far as I could get. I do believe that like I was part of like holding down the vibration in Miami for a long time, and I was being used there for the time, and I had a beautiful community there. But my work needed to expand, and it wasn't going to be able to expand living there. And it's not that the city gives me more, because on the contrary, Miami, I go there and people show up to my events. I can't do that here. I don't have like that kind of crowd or audience here, but what it has allowed to come through for me and how much I am less dense, if that makes sense. Like I am more of my light body here than I was in Miami.
Wow, that is so beautiful. And what you were speaking to about needing to become the version of self that was ready to be on the land makes so much sense. And in some way, it's another version of what you were talking about with being pregnant and, sort of working with the energy of the kid that you're going to bring through and unlocking those archetypal aspects of yourself to be the steward of them. And it's true with being the steward of this land. You had to unlock the version of self that was ready to be the steward of this land. And it's so interesting, this common theme that's coming up, because I think people are in this moment energetically where it's such a rebirth and people are birthing so many new things into their life, new versions of self, new living situations, new relationship dynamics. And if they're not coming through yet, if the brakes are pumped, if it feels clunky, if it feels testy, if it's not smooth, it's not a bad thing. It means it's ironing everything out so you can authentically hold what you're calling in. And like on these big astrology days where it's like Jupiter is meeting up with the sun and all good things, if on those days you feel testy and difficult and like things aren't in flow, that's just another manifestation of that idea that it's like, no, this actually is for your highest good. We're bringing to your attention right now all of the blocks, all of the scarcity consciousness, all of the wounds that are keeping you, because sure, you can get this thing, but if you don't change, heal, grow, evolve, shed, you won't authentically hold it. And so I think that's such a good example of that with your story.
Yeah, I love that. That's like such a great way of saying it. And yeah, you hate it when it's happening, but it's really like, no, like your manifestation is working. Like what you want is coming. We're just showing you what can't go with you.
Yes. Ooh, chills. Yeah, we're showing you what can't go with you. I mean, can't say it better than that. Nikki, I could talk to you all day. I love this conversation so much, and I know that our hummingbird community will love it too. Can you tell them where they can find you and work with you?
Yeah, thank you, Taylor. It's been a pleasure being with you guys. I can feel all your beautiful energy. I have a hummingbird notebook in front of me, so
You say I'm getting chills.
I'm just connected to you guys. So thank you. I have my own podcast called the Soul Led Living, where I do the collective reading. So if you ever want to check me out there, if you're a podcast listener, and I'm on Instagram, pretty active. So feel free to reach out to me, send me a DM. I also have a book called Soul Led Living, which is on Amazon in case you want some more of whatever you got from today.
Beautiful. I know everybody's going to love this conversation. So thank you so, so much.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Sitting with Spirit, my loves, the portion of the podcast, which I'm sure you're familiar with by now, but for any new listeners, where I sit with our angels, with our guides, and I get the messages for the collective, and I bring through a past loved one in spirit who usually is working with other past loved ones in spirit to bring evidence that a lot of people could understand and a message that's for a lot of people, but sometimes it lines up perfectly that this is your person. And so take what resonates and leave the rest, as always. So starting off with the angel messages, I got a really interesting message about, well, it was this image of a witch's hat made of shadow, and it was in a tug of war with our crown chakra. And it gave me the feeling that right now it is more imperative than ever to heal the witch wound, to lean into our intuition. It's interesting because people talk about psychic protection. Psychic protection is listening to spirit. Mic drop. Psychic protection is listening to spirit because that is what gets you in alignment with your path of highest good. Psychic protection is learning to listen to your angels and guides over your shadows, your past wounding, your scarcity consciousness, your ancestral pain. Psychic protection is learning to equip yourself with the team of light that exists all around you so that you can connect with your path of highest good. Psychic protection is when your angels and your guides tell you, hey, this isn't for your highest good. Hey, look out. Hey, move this way. That is protecting you from what we really need protection from, which isn't some scary spirit on the other side. It's what's possible here on earth. And spirit is actually the protection. Spirit, our angels, our guides are the protection. And I think that is important to remember because we can sometimes think of spirit, our angels, our guides, maybe not so much angels, but spirits for sure, as being scary and that we don't have power over them, when in reality, they're here to help us. And what we have to quote unquote fear exists here on earth, and they're here to help us navigate that. And so in that vein, I saw this witch's hat made of shadow. And I feel like there is something here about deeper shadows around spiritual connection, trusting your intuition, making choices that might not feel as practical or safe or linear, but that resonate for you in a deeper heart space way, starting to get more in touch with our spiritual toolbox, because I see a deeper layer of shadow coming up to be healed. I see the dredges of this darkness, which people who are psychic mediums, who are at earlier stages of their development, tell people you have a curse on you, you have a evil spirit attached to you. But what they don't realize that they're actually feeling or sensing or seeing or hearing is a wounded consciousness, is a shadowy aspect of self, is something that might have happened in the past that needs healing around it. But in their level of development, they think that it's a demon or something. So with that being said, the message is that we're in a moment where these deeper parts of our wounded consciousness, both collectively and individually, are coming up. It's like coming up from the dregs, coming up from the subconscious to be seen. And it's more important than ever for us to have that witch's hat on, which is my symbol for being in our spiritual authority, creating sacred space, listening, feeling safe to be powerful, feeling safe to be heard, feeling safe to be inconvenient, feeling safe to be authentically different. If that's your authentic self is different, feeling safe to stand in that beautiful, authentic expression. And so the message here is that a lot of people are questioning, anxious, second guessing, and that's nothing new. I feel that with a lot of my clients in readings. But what is new is that your angels are saying this is actually a good thing. Similar to how a illness tries to fight back before it fully heals, kind of like how you'll have a flare up before it heals. That's what the overthinking is feeling like to me. It's feeling like it's turned up because it's threatened. It feels like it knows that you are on the verge of being a whole new version of self. You are on the verge of making such big leaps and transformations and starting to let go of the reins of control a little bit in the crown chakra and sink back to your heart and following your heart as your GPS system. And so it feels like the part of your consciousness in the crown chakra that's trying to protect you, it's trying to protect you, but it's actually sabotaging you because you get the message, you get the download, you get the inspiration, you get the idea, and then immediately that overthinking talks you out of it and keeps you stuck and small and in the same pattern that you've been in. And so the message now is that this overthinking being turned up a little extra loud is actually a good thing because that part of your crown chakra feels a bit threatened, that all of this spiritual knowledge, all of this self growth, all of this remembering your intuition is starting to shift who you are on a fundamental level, peeling back the layers that are not your true self and helping to remember who you truly are inside and on a soul level. And so don't think of the overthinking as something that's wrong with you. Don't think of it as, oh, I am my overthinking, or this is a part of my story of self. Think of it as a symptom. Think of it as something that's trying to fight back and listen to it as a messenger. And chances are you can trace it back to a relative, a moment that your heart was broken, some time that you were wounded and you started to use it as a crutch and a safety blanket. And now the witch's hat made of shadow is not a bad thing or a scary thing. It's a strong thing. It's a looking at the shadows and having the spiritual toolbox and authority and power to face them head on and to move forward with a new sense of strength and knowing that you have your angels and your guides having your back and fully trusting that and starting to loosen the reins. So there's a little bit of like a power play going on with the crown chakra collectively, but especially for the hummingbird community, it's a moment where we are shifting back to who we've been in many lifetimes and who we truly are. So the other thing I was seeing is the sign of the third eye. And so the third eye is right next to the crown chakra energetically. And so all of that is so important. And I feel like so many of you guys are dabbling and developing and working on connection. I'm not going to say trying because you are connecting, but you're working on understanding the connection and developing the connection. And they show me more than ever that you have your ability to connect and get your messages, and that you need to trust that. And I feel like this conversation with Nikki and I will have a lot of activations for you guys. Like, I could just feel as we were talking that you guys will be like, oh, I feel that too, or I resonate with this. Oh, that's how my intuition feels. Like, yes. And so take all of that as validation on your path, because I see our third eyes opening more and more. And it's like I said in an earlier episode, let's move away from being excited by magic, by wanting to believe in magic, to expecting magic. Life is magical. We are magical. Magic exists. Expect it. And so I do feel like, in that vein of the crown chakra block and the stories and the overthinking, I do feel a lot of themes around ancestral healing coming up, which is also very synchronistic with what Nikki and I spoke about in the episode. And I do feel like for so many of us, we don't realize how ingrained our parents' voices are and how ingrained their parents' voices were in them, until we start to detangle things and do this work. I mean, just the other day, I was brushing my teeth and I realized that my inner villain voice goes to the most dark places. And at this point, I kind of just laugh at it. I don't recognize it as truth, but I won't say who, but somebody in my family, I realized that is completely their voice. Like, that is not me to go to the worst case scenario. And I just put it together that that is totally a family member who, if you heard the way they jump to the worst possible thing that could happen, you would know exactly what I'm talking about. But so there is just this message here of, most likely that fearful consciousness was inherited on some level, and we're in a deeper level of cycle breaking, and that's a part of the crown chakra healing right now too. And it's going to feel really unsafe to follow your heart if you don't come from a lineage where that was accepted or celebrated or praised. If you came from a lineage that was in survival mode, or you came from a lineage that didn't feel their feelings, or pushed things down, or numbed, or denied, or hid their truth, there's so many different ways that this could come about. But that's part of the detangling of the crown chakra block too, is like, what is my authentic voice around this? What do I really believe about this? Not just what I'm expected to believe, been programmed to believe, or what my family thinks I should do or believe. But it's really interesting because, with that being said, I was in a mediumship reading today, and there were this woman's family, like so many different people came in, and she was working on ancestral healing. And so I had her father in spirit come through, and we were talking about alcoholism, and we were talking about different things with that. But then she had this awesome grandmother, and this grandmother was like, I'm strong. I am strong as hell, and I protected my kids, and there were 5 of us, and I made sure everything was good. And she just had this power, and she's like, I want my granddaughter to not only focus on the healing in the lineage, I want her to remember the badass ancestors that she also has supporting her with gifts. Like, my marriage with my husband was beautiful. She has that in her lineage. I'm a powerful woman. She has me as a guide. And so I loved that reminder for the collective of, so often we can get focused on what isn't working. We can look at our ancestors that did things less than perfect and see ourselves in their stories and see how we need to fix things and heal things. But to keep the scales balanced, also remember how many badass ancestors that you had too, how many powerful people, and they are guides around you in spirit, especially for those of you guys doing the work on yourselves and with the higher consciousness, like all of you in this community. And I think that's a really beautiful thing to remember. The other message that I got in the vein of ancestral healing is that you don't know what you don't know. And the crown chakra block, the ancestral wounds, the scarcity consciousness, all those things I've been talking about, the shadows, they create blinders in us, and they keep us only able to see in a very narrow scope. And the message that I got was to say out loud to your angels and guides, to set the intention, please show me solutions that I'm not seeing yet. Because so often we can focus on the problem, what's wrong, what's missing. But I got this feeling that your angels and guides are sending you solutions, but you're not recognizing them because they're outside of the scope of the one picture you have in your head, the one way it can look, the one attachment to outcome, the one scenario you expect. And so there's something here about opening your horizons and seeing solutions and expanding your consciousness and setting the intention to look for solutions instead of problems or lack or not enough or what isn't working. And I would be interested, you guys, please write me, contact@magichourpod.com, how things shift for you when you set that intention. Because like they were saying, there's just this feeling of being so attached to outcomes and that being tied to the ancestral stuff. Like, well, this is how it's been done for generations, or no one in my family has ever done this, or it's in my family to communicate this way, or think of the world in this way. And I feel like the message I'm really trying to get at here is that, especially in this community, we're a group of people that are starting to break barriers of wounded consciousness and move the ball forward and see things in a new way. And what's coming through now is holding our lives to higher standards, having the self-worth and the love to hold our life to a higher standard. And it's not that your ancestors didn't love their lives, but we have a different access to knowledge and technology and connection than ever before. And it gives us different ideas about what's possible for ourselves. And by holding our lives to a higher standard, I basically mean not self-sacrifice, listening to our heart, being in our power, and choosing a life of love and joy. And that would seem simple and basic, but it's not. It's not. And it takes a lot of, work and growth and intentionality in this society to stay in that vibration. So there's a lot of different layers with the crown chakra stuff coming through. And that's the ultimate message too, like sort of filtering through all of that so that you can get into an intuitive and solution oriented mindset. And the reason that you'll need the intuitive part, besides the obvious, is that the answers and the solutions might not be obvious. Because if they were obvious to you, you would have already acted on them ages ago. You would already know them. So they might come about in a way that surprises you or takes a left turn. And the intuitive part of the puzzle will help you feel the rightness of them or the alignment, or if they're not right. So that's the fusion of that. And I do just feel like we're in a moment of a lot of change and growth and evolution. And, for a lot of people, I do feel like it can feel really scary to not know what's coming and to know there needs to be change, but not exactly what that looks like. And so lean on these messages that I've been saying this whole time. Start to expand your idea of what's possible. Start to find solutions in places that were hidden in plain sight that your previous consciousness didn't see. So I did have a female in spirit coming through, and this felt like a pretty difficult connection with a lot of grief and a lot of ancestral trauma, which sort of seems like a theme of this sitting with spirit. She felt very down on herself. I feel like she passed young and it felt like a mother figure, but I feel like you never spoke to her. I feel like she put you up for adoption and you didn't know her. And the feeling that I got is that she wished she could speak to you, but there was something contractually that she wasn't allowed to reach out to you. And so I just get this feeling of like so many unprocessed emotions because you never got to actually speak to your biological mother and tell her how you feel and do that self-work. And so it feels like all of that is just sitting on your heart as this sort of unprocessed bundle of emotions. I did feel drug use with her, and I felt like she was very much down on herself, very disconnected from her personal power. And I got this feeling from her of having to just always sort of hide. And I feel like she had a very difficult dynamic with her dad. And that's part of the origin of where this ancestral trauma began, was with her dad. And I get the feeling that she was always hiding. She was always running. She was just always in this state of damage control and just feeling really bad about herself. And the whole time she was here, there was just her blaming herself, her thinking she was the worst person ever, her truly taking the abuse that was given to her and she was too sensitive to handle it, and she internalized it and made this story about how she didn't deserve any good things. And that's what she sort of manifested then. And so I also feel like there was a connection to music with her, and I saw a guitar, and I felt like on the other side she would send you music notes. And I just got this feeling that the person that this is for has a cat, and that she shows you love through the cat. Like, I just saw this cat kind of purring and curling up on you, and I feel like there's a connection to her and this cat and showing love through the cat. And I also saw an L name, so I feel like there's something connected to the letter L with her, or you, who it's for. Your name could start with an L as well. And so the feeling that I got from her is that there's an apology there from her. There's a feeling of, I was lost, you were not lost. I was the lost one, because I feel like sometimes you might feel like a lost kid, or lost in time and space, or disconnected in that way, but she's the one that was lost. You were never lost. And I do feel like there is an element of ancestral healing when you were adopted. The message from her, since this is coming up with the Sitting with Spirit Angel message, is that you can still speak to your ancestors who are in spirit, and you can work with them, and you can heal with them, and you can set energetic boundaries. You can rewire things with them. It's like, we are still here, just not in a physical body. And so this theme of ancestral work and ancestral healing is coming up a lot right now. And that's the main message, is that we are still here even when we're not in a body, and we're in a different consciousness when we're not in a body, and we can help you grow and heal and evolve the lineage while we're here on the other side. And what I see over and over again is that when you have a difficult dynamic, especially, with a parent in spirit, and it's been such a difficult marker of your life, it's that, like, truly, 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 it's not about the kid. It's not about the kid. It's about the pain that's been passed down. It's about the inability to see outside of their own wound. And it's just about these blinders. Like, I keep coming back to the ideas of, like, these blinders on. And I feel like that's the crown chakra block too, is this limited perception. And so with everything I'm talking about today, it's all about seeing the full spectrum of what's available to you in this world, of who you are in this world. And I think this spirit came through today because she is one who had very strong blinders on. She only saw the world through how inadequate she was, and how painful life was, and how undeserving she was. Even if that wasn't true, she co-created with that story, and that became her reality. And I just feel like there's something here of just shatter those passed down stories, break free of them. And that witch's hat, that shadow work, that personal power, and that intuition are a big way to do that. And of course, again, to repeat this, setting that intention of, please show me the solutions that I'm not seeing now, and staying open. Staying open, and remembering sometimes the messages and the signs are internal, not external. And when you're always looking outside of yourself, you might miss it. So pay attention to feelings, ideas, inspiration. Keep creating sacred space for connection, which basically means space in quiet, space with intention, space where you're listening, and just trust the rest. Have a beautiful week, my loves.
For more information on Taylor and her work, go to angelsandamethyst.com or connect with her on Instagram at angels_and_amethyst. She is the one verified account with this name and will never DM you for a reading. If you have any questions about intuition, spirituality, angels, or anything and everything magical, please email contact@magichourpod.com. We will answer listener questions once a month in our solo episodes. Are you an aligned business owner that would like to advertise to our beautiful hummingbird community? Please email contact@magichourpod.com. Make sure you're subscribing to Magic Hour so you never miss the magic. And don't forget to leave us 5 sparkling star reviews. They help more magical people find the pod. Please screenshot and email your 5-star reviews to contact@magichourpod.com, and we will send you a free downloadable angelic meditation and enter you to win an angel reading with Taylor Page. The next giveaway will happen when we hit 166 5-star reviews.
Thank you for listening to Magic Hour with Taylor Page. Remember, you are magic.